The people who laugh at you today may be the very ones begging for your help tomorrow, but only if you have the courage to let the truth wait. The annual Heartland Livestock Auction was the biggest event in Mason County, drawing ranchers, investors, and farmers from across the state. Long before sunrise, polished pickup trucks filled the parking lot, while expensive boots crunched across the gravel. Everyone had come to make deals, build connections, and show off their success. Then an old rust-covered pickup rolled slowly toward the entrance, pulling a weathered livestock trailer carrying a handful of healthy pigs. Heads turned almost instantly. The truck looked like it had survived decades of hard work, and so did the man behind the wheel. Ethan Carter stepped out wearing faded jeans, worn work boots, a flannel shirt with patched elbows, and a dusty baseball cap. His hands carried the marks of years spent working on a farm. His face was handsome beneath the dust, but few people bothered to notice. They saw only what they expected to see: a poor pig farmer. A security volunteer glanced at Ethan's registration papers before shaking his head with a smirk. "General parking is full. You'll have to unload out back." Ethan smiled politely. "That's fine. I appreciate it." As he guided his trailer around the building, several well-dressed ranch owners laughed quietly among themselves. "Pig farmers never make real money," one man whispered, loudly enough for others to hear. "Looks like he spent more feeding those hogs than buying himself decent clothes," another joked. Their laughter spread through the crowd. Ethan acted as though he heard nothing. He carefully checked each animal, making sure they had fresh water, before closing the trailer gate with gentle hands. A few minutes later, he walked toward the registration hall carrying a simple folder. Before he reached the entrance, a luxury SUV stopped nearby. Brandon Hayes climbed out wearing an expensive tailored jacket, followed by several local business owners eager to shake his hand. Brandon was known throughout the county as the region's wealthiest livestock investor, and he enjoyed every second of the attention. His eyes landed on Ethan almost immediately. "Careful where you're standing," Brandon said with a confident grin. "Some of us are here to do serious business." A ripple of laughter followed. Ethan stepped aside without arguing. "Good luck today," he replied calmly. Brandon looked almost disappointed that he hadn't provoked a reaction. Inside the exhibition hall, conversation stopped whenever wealthy buyers entered, but Ethan blended into the background as though he were invisible. He quietly filled out paperwork and waited his turn, while others walked ahead without asking. Only one person noticed. Grace Mitchell looked up from the customer service counter and smiled warmly. "Sir, I think they skipped your number. Let me fix that for you." Ethan blinked with quiet surprise. "Thank you. Most people don't even notice." Grace handed him a fresh registration badge. Everyone deserves to be treated fairly. Their eyes met for only a second before another customer interrupted her. Ethan nodded gratefully and stepped away, unaware that Brandon had watched the brief exchange from across the room. Brandon's expression hardened. To him, kindness toward someone like Ethan made no sense at all. But neither Brandon nor anyone else had the slightest idea that the quiet pig farmer they had mocked all morning had come to Mason County for a reason far greater than selling livestock. And before this week was over, the entire town would wish they had treated him very differently. After finishing the paperwork, Ethan walked back toward the livestock barns, where the constant sounds of snorting pigs, rumbling tractors, and friendly conversations filled the warm morning air. He ignored the curious stares that followed him across the fairgrounds. Every step seemed to confirm what everyone had already decided about him. To them, he was simply another struggling farmer hoping to make enough money to survive another season. The truth rested quietly beneath the dust on his boots, and he intended to keep it that way. His pigs were clean, healthy, and surprisingly calm. Ethan moved from one pen to another, checking fresh water buckets, adjusting feed, and gently patting each animal as though they were worth far more than their market value. A neighboring farmer watched him for several minutes before shaking his head. "You spend too much time taking care of pigs that are only going to be sold," the man said. Ethan smiled. "If something depends on me, it deserves my best." The older farmer looked surprised by the answer before walking away without another word. A little later, an elderly groundskeeper struggled to pull a heavy cart loaded with folded tables across loose gravel. Several exhibitors glanced in his direction, but quickly returned to their conversations. Ethan immediately stepped over. "Would you like a hand?" he asked. The older man looked relieved. "I would appreciate that very much." Together, they rolled the cart nearly 200 yards to the exhibition hall. When the grateful groundskeeper reached into his pocket for a few dollars, Ethan gently raised his hand. "Please keep it. I was happy to help." The man smiled warmly. There are not many people left who say that. As Ethan headed back toward the barns, he noticed Grace carrying 2 heavy boxes filled with registration packets. Without saying a word, he picked up one of the boxes. Grace laughed softly. "You already helped me once today." "That does not mean I cannot help again," Ethan replied. They walked side by side through the busy hallway. Grace glanced at his weathered hands. "You must work every day." "Every day teaches something," Ethan answered. "Some lessons come from success. Others come from hard mornings." She admired the quiet confidence in his voice. Most people who came through the auction spent their time talking about profits, expensive equipment, or future investments. Ethan never mentioned money. Instead, he asked about her family, her hometown, and how long she had worked at the fairgrounds. Before she could answer another question, Brandon appeared once again with several influential buyers following behind him. He looked at Ethan carrying the box and chuckled. "Looks like you found yourself another job." Several people laughed politely. Ethan calmly placed the box on the counter without responding. Grace did not laugh. She looked directly at Brandon. He was helping because nobody else offered. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Brandon forced a smile before leading his guests away, but the expression on his face revealed that Grace's simple words had irritated him far more than he wanted anyone to notice. Ethan thanked her quietly and returned to his livestock, unaware that the smallest act of kindness had already begun changing the course of both their lives. While somewhere beyond the crowded fairgrounds, plans much bigger than anyone could imagine were already moving into place. The afternoon sun settled over the fairgrounds as the first round of livestock judging came to an end. Buyers gathered around polished tables, comparing numbers, discussing investments, and making plans that could change entire businesses. Ethan stayed far from the loud conversations. He preferred the quiet corner beside the animal barns, where the scent of fresh hay and the gentle sounds of the pigs reminded him why he had chosen this path in the first place. While others measured success by appearances, he believed character was revealed by the way people treated those who could offer nothing in return. A young boy wandered through the barn holding a paper cup of feed, almost as large as his arms. He stopped in front of Ethan's pen and smiled at one of the smallest piglets. The child accidentally dropped the cup, scattering feed across the ground. His shoulders sank with disappointment. Before his father could scold him, Ethan knelt beside the boy with a warm smile. Together, they gathered fresh feed, and Ethan carefully showed him how to let the pig eat from the palm of his hand. The little boy laughed with pure excitement, while his father watched in silence. When they prepared to leave, the grateful father quietly offered Ethan $20 for his kindness. Ethan gently shook his head. "Your son already gave me something more valuable. He reminded me that good moments do not have a price." The father left with a thoughtful expression that lingered long after they disappeared into the crowd. Nearby, Grace had witnessed everything from the registration office window. Later that afternoon, she found Ethan sitting alone on a wooden fence, drinking a bottle of water after finishing his work. She walked over carrying 2 fresh sandwiches from the food stand. "I noticed you skipped lunch," she said with an easy smile. Ethan hesitated. "You did not have to do that." Grace handed him one anyway. "I wanted to." They shared a quiet meal while watching families explore the fairgrounds. Grace asked what had inspired him to become a pig farmer. Ethan looked toward the barns before answering carefully. "People often judge what they see first. They think hard work is something to avoid. I think hard work teaches you who you really are." Grace listened closely. His answer felt different from the usual conversations she heard every day. There was wisdom behind his simple words that did not match the worn clothes he wore. Before she could ask another question, Brandon walked past with several investors. He slowed when he noticed them sitting together. "Grace," he called confidently, "you should spend your time with people who can actually improve your future." Ethan simply smiled and stood up. "Thank you for lunch," he said to Grace. "Your kindness means more than you know." He walked away without another word, leaving Brandon strangely frustrated. Grace watched Ethan disappear into the barns, unaware that every choice he made was quietly revealing the kind of man he truly was, even while the greatest secret of his life remained completely hidden. By early evening, the excitement around the auction shifted from the livestock barns to the grand reception pavilion, where local investors, ranch owners, and community leaders gathered for a private networking dinner. Crystal lights hung from the wooden beams, country music played softly in the background, and every table displayed polished silver and fresh flowers. Ethan had received the same invitation as every registered exhibitor, so he quietly walked toward the entrance, wearing the same clean but well-worn clothes he had arrived in that morning. Before he could step inside, one of the event attendants looked him up and down with an uncertain smile. "Sir, this dinner is intended for premium guests." Ethan calmly held out his invitation. The attendant studied it, then hesitated as Brandon Hayes approached with several influential business partners. Brandon glanced at Ethan and laughed lightly. "There has to be some mistake. I doubt he belongs in a room where million-dollar deals are discussed." A few guests smiled politely, unwilling to challenge the most powerful investor in the county. Ethan remained composed. "I was invited just like everyone else." Brandon folded his arms. Maybe they wanted someone to explain pig feed prices during dessert. Quiet laughter spread across the entrance. Ethan lowered his invitation without showing the slightest sign of anger. "If my presence makes anyone uncomfortable, I can leave." Before anyone answered, Grace stepped out from inside the pavilion carrying a stack of seating cards. She immediately recognized Ethan. "He is on the guest list," she said with complete confidence. The attendant checked once more and nodded. "She's right. His name is here." Brandon forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. Rules are rules, I suppose. Ethan thanked the attendant and walked inside without another word. Throughout dinner, he sat at the far end of the room, listening more than speaking. Conversations around him revolved around expensive machinery, expanding operations, and buying smaller farms. More than once, someone asked Ethan how many acres he owned. He answered honestly, "Only enough to care for every animal properly." Several guests exchanged amused looks, assuming his farm was insignificant. Grace noticed that while everyone else competed for attention, Ethan quietly helped an elderly guest carry a heavy serving tray after it accidentally tipped sideways. He also offered his chair to an older rancher whose knee had begun bothering him after standing too long. None of those small acts attracted applause. Most people barely noticed. Grace noticed every one of them. As dessert was being served, Brandon stood to welcome several new investors who had just arrived from out of town. He proudly spoke about wealth, influence, and the future of agriculture, carefully presenting himself as the natural leader everyone should trust. Ethan simply listened in silence, his expression calm and thoughtful. Then, just as Brandon finished speaking, A black luxury sedan slowly pulled into the restricted parking area outside the pavilion. Through the large windows, several guests turned to watch the unfamiliar vehicle. Brandon frowned. No one on the guest list had expected such an arrival, and somewhere inside that elegant car sat someone whose appearance was about to change the direction of the entire event. Every conversation inside the reception hall slowed as the sleek black sedan came to a smooth stop outside the tall front windows. The vehicle carried no company logo and no license plate frame that revealed its owner. Even Brandon looked puzzled. He quietly excused himself from the investors and stepped closer to the entrance, clearly hoping to greet another wealthy guest before anyone else could. The driver stepped out first, dressed in a dark suit with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to serving important people. He walked to the rear passenger door and waited respectfully, but instead of opening it immediately, he checked his phone as though waiting for instructions. Curious whispers spread across the room. Grace noticed Ethan watching through the window with only mild interest before returning his attention to the glass of iced tea in front of him. Unlike everyone else, he seemed completely unconcerned about who had arrived. A few moments later, Ethan's own phone vibrated quietly inside his jacket pocket. He glanced at the screen for only a second before slipping the phone back without answering. Grace happened to notice the movement. "Are you not going to take that call?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled. "It can wait. I would rather finish our conversation." Grace found that answer strangely refreshing. Nearly everyone she met interrupted conversations the moment business called. Ethan acted as though people mattered more than schedules. Outside, the suited driver looked at his own phone again, then nodded almost imperceptibly before returning to the driver's seat. The sedan slowly pulled away from the building without anyone getting out. A wave of confusion passed through the guests. Brandon frowned. "That was unusual," one investor commented. Another shrugged. "Maybe they had the wrong location." Brandon forced a laugh, but he continued staring through the window long after the car disappeared. Something about the brief visit unsettled him. Across the room, Ethan remained perfectly calm. He asked Grace whether she enjoyed living in Mason County, and she admitted she had dreamed about seeing more of the country one day. Ethan listened carefully, never interrupting. "I hope you get that chance," he said sincerely. "Good people deserve to see how much bigger the world really is." Grace smiled, touched by the encouragement. As the evening continued, one of the event coordinators hurried inside carrying a clipboard. She quietly informed the organizing committee that an anonymous agricultural foundation had requested updated reports on every major livestock operation in the county, including financial records, production methods, and community involvement. The request surprised everyone because the foundation had enough funding to transform the local economy if it decided to invest. Brandon immediately became excited. "That opportunity belongs with experienced operators," he declared confidently. Several business owners quickly agreed. Ethan simply listened in silence, while Grace noticed something she could not explain. When the foundation's name was mentioned, Ethan did not appear surprised at all. Instead, he looked toward the dark parking lot with a thoughtful expression, as though he already knew something that everyone else had yet to discover. And somewhere beyond the fairgrounds, a decision that would change countless lives was drawing closer with every passing hour. The next morning, the fairgrounds came alive even earlier than before. News about the mysterious agricultural foundation had spread overnight, and every exhibitor hoped to make the strongest impression possible. Brandon arrived with photographers, polished presentations, and a team of assistants following closely behind him. He greeted everyone with confident handshakes, convinced that the foundation would naturally choose someone with his reputation. Across the grounds, Ethan quietly finished feeding his pigs before sunrise. He checked every gate, cleaned every pen, and made certain each animal had fresh water. There were no cameras watching him, no audience waiting to applaud. He simply believed that doing the right thing did not require recognition. Grace arrived shortly afterward, carrying a clipboard filled with updated schedules. She smiled when she found Ethan already working. "You have been here since dawn again," she said. Ethan nodded with an easy smile. "The animals cannot wait for business hours." Grace laughed softly. "You make everything sound so simple." Ethan looked at the pigs resting peacefully inside the pen. "The important things usually are." Before Grace could answer, several black sport utility vehicles entered the fairgrounds and parked near the administration building. Unlike the sedan from the night before, these vehicles displayed discreet credentials from the Agricultural Foundation. Event organizers hurried across the property, while volunteers straightened signs and prepared meeting rooms. Excitement quickly spread through the crowd. Brandon immediately gathered his team and walked confidently toward the administration building, eager to introduce himself before anyone else. Ethan remained exactly where he was, calmly repairing a loose wooden fence beside the livestock barn. Grace watched him with growing curiosity. "Everyone is rushing to meet the Foundation representatives," she said. "Why are you staying here?" Ethan tightened the final bolt before standing upright. "People reveal more about themselves when they believe nobody important is watching." Grace considered his answer carefully. It sounded less like the opinion of a struggling farmer, and more like advice from someone who had spent years studying human nature. At that moment, one of the Foundation representatives walked across the fairgrounds carrying a folder. He briefly glanced toward Ethan, offered the smallest respectful nod, then continued without saying a word. The exchange lasted only a second, yet Grace noticed it immediately. Ethan simply returned the nod and continued stacking feed bags as though nothing unusual had happened. Brandon, however, missed the silent exchange entirely because he was busy presenting glossy brochures inside the conference room. Throughout the morning, more small details began to stand out. Ethan received another phone call, but quietly silenced it without answering. A man in an expensive business suit approached the livestock barns, appeared ready to speak with Ethan, then paused after seeing nearby visitors before walking away again. None of it made sense to Grace anymore. The humble farmer everyone dismissed seemed strangely familiar to people connected with the powerful foundation. She looked at Ethan once more, realizing there was a story hidden behind his quiet smile that nobody else had discovered. And deep inside she felt that the truth, whatever it was, would soon change everything they believed about the man standing beside those simple pig pens. By noon, the central conference hall was filled beyond capacity. Farmers, investors, reporters, and local officials gathered around the main stage after hearing that the Agricultural Foundation was finally ready to announce the partner who would lead its largest rural development project in decades. The winning organization would receive funding worth hundreds of millions of dollars to modernize livestock farming, create new jobs, and transform struggling communities across the region. Brandon stood confidently in the front row, wearing his finest suit. He had already convinced himself the announcement was only a formality. Grace remained near the side of the room, helping guests find their seats, but every few moments, her eyes searched for Ethan. She finally spotted him entering quietly through a side door, still dressed exactly as he had been since arriving at the fair. Several people noticed him and exchanged amused smiles. One businessman whispered, "He must be lost again." Ethan simply found an empty seat near the back and waited patiently. Moments later, the room fell silent as the Foundation's executive director stepped onto the stage beside several board members and legal advisors. Behind them, a large screen displayed the Foundation's emblem. The director thanked everyone for attending before explaining that their team had spent months secretly evaluating farms, businesses, and community leaders throughout the state. They had not focused only on profits. They had measured integrity, compassion, long-term vision, and the way people treated others when no reward was expected. Brandon smiled confidently, believing those words still described him. Then the director continued. Our evaluation included anonymous site visits, independent interviews, and direct observation during this livestock exhibition. A wave of curiosity swept through the audience. Grace felt her heart begin to race. The director looked toward the back of the room. There is one person we would like to invite to the stage. Every head turned. Mr. Ethan Carter, would you please join us? Silence filled the hall. Brandon slowly looked over his shoulder with complete disbelief. Ethan stood calmly, adjusted his worn jacket, and walked toward the stage with the same quiet confidence he had shown since the first day. As soon as he stepped onto the platform, several board members greeted him with warm smiles and respectful handshakes. One senior executive addressed him with unmistakable respect. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter." Gasps echoed across the room. Grace stared in stunned silence. Brandon's confident expression disappeared. The executive director smiled at the audience before making the announcement everyone would remember for years. Many of you believed Mr. Carter was simply a small pig farmer. In reality, he is the founder and chief executive officer of Carter Agricultural Holdings, one of the largest privately owned agricultural companies in the United States and the principal benefactor of this foundation. He chose to visit this community without revealing his identity because he wanted to discover who valued people before status. The room became completely still as every conversation, every laugh, and every careless judgment from the past 2 days suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The conference hall that had been filled with confident conversations became completely silent. Brandon stood frozen in the front row, staring at Ethan as though he had never truly seen him before. Every joke he had made, every dismissive remark, and every moment of quiet arrogance replayed inside his mind. Grace remained speechless. The humble man who had carried boxes, repaired fences, and spent hours caring for his animals, without asking for recognition, was now standing beside some of the most influential leaders in American agriculture. The executive director smiled warmly before inviting Ethan to address the audience. Ethan stepped toward the microphone without changing his calm expression. "Thank you for welcoming me to your community," he began. "Some of you welcomed me with kindness. Some of you welcomed me with assumptions. Both taught me something valuable." His voice was steady and sincere. "For the past several months, our foundation has been searching for a community where character still mattered more than appearance. Money can build facilities. It cannot build trust. Only people can do that." Every word settled heavily across the room. Ethan continued. "I never came here looking for perfect farmers or perfect businesses. I came looking for honest hearts." Brandon slowly lowered his eyes. For the first time in years, confidence gave way to regret. When the speech ended, polite applause grew into a standing ovation. Yet Ethan's attention was not on the applause. His eyes found Grace standing quietly near the side of the stage. She looked both surprised and embarrassed. As the crowd began surrounding Ethan with congratulations, business cards, and requests for meetings, Brandon pushed his way forward. His confident smile had disappeared completely. "Mr. Carter," he said carefully, "I owe you an apology. I judged you far too quickly. I hope we can start over." Ethan looked at him with calm understanding. "Everyone deserves the chance to learn from a mistake," he replied. "The important question is whether we actually change afterward." Brandon nodded quietly, realizing there would be no special treatment, simply because he had finally learned the truth. A few moments later, several investors who had ignored Ethan only hours earlier suddenly asked for private meetings, partnership opportunities, and photographs. Ethan politely thanked each of them but made no promises. Their sudden interest confirmed exactly why he had hidden his identity in the first place. Then he walked through the crowd until he reached Grace. She smiled nervously. "I do not even know what to say." Ethan smiled back. "You already said everything that mattered before you knew who I was." Grace looked confused. Ethan continued gently. "You treated me with respect when everyone else believed I had nothing to offer. You helped me because you believed it was the right thing to do, not because you expected anything in return." Grace lowered her eyes, touched by his words. Around them, the celebration continued, but Ethan knew that the most important discovery he had made during his entire journey had never been about business, and the decision he was about to announce next would surprise the entire community once again. When the applause finally settled, Ethan returned to the microphone one last time. The room grew quiet again, expecting another business announcement. Instead, he smiled gently. "Today is not about proving who I am," he said. "It is about proving what kind of community we can become if we choose character over appearance." He looked across the audience, making eye contact with farmers, volunteers, students, and families. This foundation will move forward with its investment in Mason County, but the money will not belong to one person. It will build training centers, modern livestock facilities, scholarships for young farmers, and emergency support programs for families who need a second chance. A wave of relieved smiles spread throughout the hall. Ethan continued, "Success grows stronger when it is shared." He then invited the foundation board members to stand beside him as they unveiled detailed plans for the new agricultural initiative. The audience watched in amazement as maps, construction plans, and educational programs appeared on the large screen. Hundreds of new jobs would be created over the next several years. Local farms would receive access to advanced technology and better distribution networks. Small family operations would finally have opportunities that had once seemed impossible. Ethan turned toward Grace. "There is one more announcement." She looked at him with quiet surprise. "During my time here, one person consistently reminded me that kindness is not something you perform for recognition. It is simply who you are when nobody important is watching." The room followed his gaze toward Grace. She immediately felt every eye in the building resting on her. Ethan smiled warmly. "Grace Mitchell, I would be honored if you would accept a position as Community Partnership Director for our new regional program. Your job will be to make sure every family who deserves an opportunity has someone willing to listen." Grace covered her mouth in disbelief. "I do not know if I am qualified," Ethan answered without hesitation. "Compassion cannot be taught in a classroom. You have already demonstrated the qualities that matter most." The audience applauded as tears of gratitude filled Grace's eyes. She accepted the opportunity with quiet humility, promising to serve the community with the same kindness she had always shown. Brandon also stepped forward once more. This time there was no pride left in his voice. "Congratulations," he said sincerely. "I have learned more in 2 days than I have in years." Ethan shook his hand. "Then this journey has already been worthwhile." Months later, construction had begun across Mason County. New barns, training facilities, and community centers stood where empty fields had once stretched for miles. Farmers who had struggled for years were finally looking toward the future with hope. Grace became one of the most respected leaders in the program, and Ethan continued visiting the community, often wearing the same simple clothes he had worn on the first day, because he never wanted people to forget the lesson that changed so many lives. Wealth may open doors, but kindness opens hearts, and the people who choose to see the value in others before discovering their success are the ones who find treasures that money can never buy.